My name is Peyton Lutzow, and this is a presentation on homelessness amongst female victims of domestic violence for the sociology of homelessness. The reason we should study this subject is that there is a lot of research on homelessness and a lot of research on domestic violence, but not the two combined. Furthermore, by more closely studying populations like this, policies can be better formulated to assist marginalized people such as these. I argue that fleeing domestic violence can result in serious monetary issues, especially in low-income families. Those fleeing domestic violence face difficulty obtaining suitable housing, and government policies do not accommodate for the specific issues faced by those fleeing domestic violence. The Family, Youth, and Service Bureau compiled information from 5 studies conducted between 1998 and 2004 and found that between 22 and 57% of all homeless women report that domestic violence was the immediate cause of their homelessness. One of the big reasons that domestic violence is seen as a direct cause of homelessness is when a victim leaves their abuser, they are usually cutting their income in half, if not completely removing it. There are cases where the woman being abused provided the majority of the income, but this is less common. On top of this, victims of domestic violence may be subject to having fewer social ties and thus a weaker safety net because of the tendency of abusers to be very controlling. Women in this situation may feel like they cannot reach out to friends and family because they were essentially forced to cut them out of their life by the abuser. Furthermore, being the victim of ongoing or past abuse can limit one's ability to work. In a study conducted by Baker, Cook, and Norris in 2003, they studied housing problems and homelessness after separation from their abuser and found that women who experienced physical abuse had approximately 1/3 the odds of working at least 30 hours per week for 6 months or more during the following year than women who had not experienced such abuse. This is likely due to injuries sustained from being abused and the fear of leaving a shelter or home because of the potential to be attacked again. Moving on, women who flee abusive relationships will generally have more difficulty finding suitable housing. When looking for suitable housing, it is important to consider how easily an abuser will be able to get to a victim, which can cause already limited housing options to decrease even further. This, in turn, extends the amount of time that the victim remains homeless. In 2000, Fleury, Sullivan, and Bivey sought to further research on abuse against women that is perpetrated by the abuser after their relationship is ended. To do this, they used a sample of 278 women recruited from a domestic violence shelter program and conducted interviews at multiple points. These times were immediately after the woman left the shelter, 10 weeks after, and then every 6 months for 2 years. They found that 36% of the participants were assaulted by an ex-partner at least once prior to the end of the study. This can make it hard to work because of the constant fear of being attacked, which can be almost paralyzing. Thus, maintaining an income to pay for housing becomes more difficult. Furthermore, federal programs designed to help women pay for part of their rent can have waiting lists of over 2 years. This is a major problem because no one plans to be homeless. is often spontaneous, and even if it isn't, those in this situation would be more focused on trying to not lose their house rather than applying to receive homeless benefits in advance. This is especially evident in cases of domestic violence because a woman may be fleeing in fear of her life does not have time to prepare funds and find new housing in advance. And even if they were able to plan in advance, they would not be eligible to get on the wait list for these programs until after finally leaving their abuser. Next, we will look at some policies that negatively affect those fleeing domestic violence. The first is the one strike and you're out policy. Under U.S. Code Title 42, Chapter 8, Subchapter 1, Section 1437D, subsection L, any criminal activity that threatens the health, safety, or right to peaceful enjoyment of the premises by other tenants, or any drug-related criminal activity on or off such premises, engaged in by a public housing tenant, any member of the tenant's household, or any guest or other person under the tenant's control, shall be cause for termination of tenancy. Now, what this basically means is that any family members or guests of someone living in public housing that those people are responsible for said members, and if they break the law in the area, the person living in the housing can get evicted. In a paper discussing the effects of the one strike and you're out policy, Michelle E. Ewert notes that this was introduced as part of the war on drugs and was intended to quell gang activity and the like, and it had an unintended side effect of this policy is the effect it has on those fleeing domestic violence. This ties into homelessness and domestic violence because any criminal acts carried out by a family member constitutes grounds for eviction, and an abusive partner in most circumstances falls under family member or guest, as previously stated. And this can be a major issue because, as previously stated, ending their relationship with the abuser does not always end the violence. And so an abuser could come into the area and break something or do something with drugs, basically anything like that. Even if the person living in the housing wasn't aware of it, they could get evicted. And that would send them back to square one, as we already talked about. Getting into public housing is already hard enough as it is, and this can be a major issue. Finally, we'll be taking a look at a few possible solutions. My first suggestion in order to help women in this situation is to reform policies like one strike and you're out, because those who are finally able to get on their feet can be sent right back to where they started, despite possibly having nothing to do with any of the crimes committed by their abuser, because of the wording of this policy. Also of note is that people have attempted to overturn this policy several times throughout the years, and at one point it was, but it got like re-overturned, and it's back to the way it was. So there just needs to be more work put into fixing this as a policy because it's fundamentally flawed. In tandem with the previous suggestion is the suggestion to allocate more funds toward public housing. Now, this isn't particularly an easy fix, but there is a fundamental issue with having upwards of a 2-year-long wait list when it comes to homelessness. Homelessness generally occurs in bursts, so having to wait that long for help is absurd. Waiting that long for help may also not be an option for many of these women, and some may even have to move back in with their abusers because they are unable to find another housing situation. and this can lead to even worse abuse if they do decide to return. My final suggestion is to crack down on perpetrators of domestic violence. For many years, domestic violence was normalized, but that is no longer the case, and we are able to see just how terrible it really is. However, this does not fix the fact that after being reported, if action is not taken fast enough, the violence can just get worse. So there just needs to a better system needs to be put in place to keep the abuser away from the victim. And that's it. Just my references.